name is Lindsay Duncan, and I'll be the moderator of our session today. I'm delighted to welcome you all to this session as part of ESOF 2020, both to those attending virtually and to those who are joining us in the virtual room at ESOF itself. We're pleased to have you all here with us today. During this session, we will be discussing how, as researchers, you can show the research community who you are. It can often be daunting to know what to say when potential supervisors, employers, and collaborators ask you to sum up your research and your achievements in a few sentences. In the session today, we will hear from experts in communicating about research, into showing how to increase your visibility and to promote your work. Our experts will also advise why it is important to showcase your work in broader terms, other than just publications and impact factors, looking at contributions to education, public communication, open science, and conferences. These are among the things that you'll often be evaluated on. So now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today, as well as go through the structure of the session. We are very pleased to have Sofia Blažević, Assistant Professor, University of Zagreb, Croatia, and trusted Mendeley advisor, join us today. Sofia is researching the modular basis of resilient behaviour. She's also the Career Centre Coordinator, as part of which she's working on new ways to help students to develop the skills they need to thrive in their work. Sofia's presentation will focus on how you, as a researcher, can develop a fulfilling career. Joining Sofia is Christopher Tankok, a Senior Communications Manager at Elsevier. Christopher Tankok has worked in STM publishing for the past 15 years. He joined Elsevier in early 2006, where he initially worked on social science book projects before moving to journals. He's managed various portfolios as a journal publisher, including linguistics, history, education, sociology, and political science. He's now editor-in-chief of Elsevier's Editors, Authors, and Reviewer Updates, and works on related communication projects. Chris has degrees in European Studies and Linguistics from Royal Holloway and the University of Oxford, respectively, and he is also based in Oxford. In his spare time, he's currently a community first responder with the South Central Ambulance Service. Chris is also the founder of Pint of Life, a new initiative which delivers free life-saving skills into the heart of the local community. Christopher's presentation will provide insights into how you can ensure the visibility for your work after publication. Following Christopher's presentation, we welcome Max Folger. Max joined Elsevier as Vice President of Global Strategic Networks for Germany, Austria, and Switzerland in 2017. Previously, he worked at the German Research Foundation, most recently as Director of its North America office based in Washington, D.C. His enthusiasm for academic publishing started as a graduate student, working at Humboldt University in Berlin as coordinator of the Internet History portal Clio Online, and then at DFG, where he began as a program officer in the Libraries and Information Systems Division. Max holds a PhD in Modern European History from Columbia University in New York. Max's presentation will consider the importance and implications of open science when you showcase your research. In terms of a bit of housekeeping before we get going with each presentation, I'd like to make you aware that each presentation will be around 15 to 20 minutes long, during which we ask for questions to be submitted to us via the Q&A panel. Following each presentation, we will endeavour to answer all the questions that are submitted to us. However, due to the volume of questions we may receive, we may not have time to answer them all, understandably, but we'll do our best to answer as many as we can in the allotted time that we have. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Sofia to the floor to take us through her presentation.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I hope you can hear me well. I'm going to have more of an American accent. Sorry for Europeans. I was born in Argentina, had my education in high school in Puerto Rico, an American high school, and I did 2 years of studies in Spain and then moved to Croatia. This is a short introduction so you can see what we're going to talk about today. I was asked by Lindsay to talk about your career development, and I had to think through a lot about what were my steps to becoming an assistant professor. And I really wanted to call this talk How to Develop Such a Fulfilling Scientific Career. So first, I would like to know who I'm talking to. If there's an audience here, hopefully, can you please go to menti.com and answer with this code and answer what is your level of education right now? Where are you now? We're going to take 30 seconds for this. So you go to menti.com, insert this code, and answer, where are you now? Oops. Okay. Just check. It's easier if you know who you're talking to. So this is why I wanted to see who's in the audience. I'm going to answer too. So oh, nice. Okay, so there is an audience. Hopefully you're listening. So this is excellent. Some bachelor students or master students, PhD, postdocs, everything. That's really cool because hopefully I can speak about each phase of career development. I'll speak my experience. I hope it helps, and I'll be open for questions, of course, now and beyond also. So this session also wants to delve on what goes beyond publications and impact factors. And for me, it's really important to talk about your contribution also to society, your communication, open science conferences, and educations, but how to get about that. So I said, okay, what can I give you? My real life examples. So what I find really important is that you always take advantage of really small experiences to take these small experiences and use them for your personal development. You are responsible for yourself and your research and your community around you. And scientific papers won't get you the happiness you might expect, but the surroundings and the people you work with will. So first, I'm going to talk about getting your skills on your own, because I had to in some situations. Then surviving being alone at the lab, because I was really alone at the lab at some points. Some tool acquisitions, which I think is really important to take into consideration. How to get noticed, investing in others, and always say yes to collaborations. Almost always say yes to collaborations. So first, getting trained. I decided on my PhD because of the mentor, and I was like, oh, I'm going to do autism research. And then all of a sudden, I find out I have to work with rats, laboratory animals. I had no experience whatsoever. Neither did I want to do this directly if somebody asked me. So no work on animals, no experience. And my PI said, okay, if you get a free course or if you get some kind of stipend, I can buy you the airplane ticket. So this is all I got because we had a really small research project. So I researched, and finally I found this scientific article on student satisfaction on a specific laboratory animal course. I was really intrigued, so I wrote them, do you still have that course which your students are really happy about? And from Uppsala University, they answered my email and they gave me an excellent training, which at that time, because of the way it was funded, it was really cheap for me. So I went to Uppsala University, where Line got all our plants and animals selected, and I got some excellent training. What came out of that? First, I was able to do my PhD thesis with a lot more knowledge of how to treat animals. And after that, now, 12 years later, I'm leading a national course on animal welfare, working with the national animal welfare organizations and the international ones, all because of this contact with this course back. I could have learned from somebody close to me, but I decided to go abroad and learn some more so I could bring it back home. And now we have had more than 300 participants in our course, which is the leading national course. So get trained, get well trained, and do not hesitate to send an email. And well, this is how our course is called, Lab Anim. Now, in the beginning, I was really, really, really alone at the lab because I was the only PhD student in the whole department, not the biology department, but in animal physiology department. And the next level person was a postdoc, and then all the rest were beyond postdocs. So I was really feeling alone. And my lab is like in the deepest part of the department of the whole building, so I get to see nobody all day. And I met some other PhD students, and we got along and said, okay, let's connect to other students at our level. The excuse, get to know the techniques other students were using. So we decided to organize a mini congress. We called it that way because it sounded like a congress, but it was mini, so it wouldn't take a lot of organization. And we were allowed to get some funding for this from the department. And we made this mini congress twice. It was quite back, but that gave us a lot of networking. Now I know my colleagues, some of them are also now assistant professors, and we're having a lot of fun together. It all started with a little congress and a little mingling and getting to know what we do. So it was really interesting, and you don't have to be alone, and we were able to connect. So, and the budget was for food because the rest we did it on our own. We used department spaces. We just asked for some money for food, and we were able to get together. And now we've had some collaborations spring out from this. So this was really, really nice. And the third thing I wanted to talk about today is that we are really not alone. There's a lot of tools, and somebody else knows you're here, besides Google, of course, who knows everything about us. There's a lot of people out there doing the same kind of work we're doing. There's a lot of young researchers, and there's many sources for where you can look for answers. Some of these resources were not available when I started working. Now you have so many videos online and so many places where you can discuss techniques. I'm still waiting, probably Mendeley or Elsevier will get this completely straight out, but getting a protocol base database so we can get really clean protocols and make it clear forever. So this is in the making, but you have a lot of mentors and colleagues. You don't have to really work only with your PhD mentor. You can look around, ask for experiences, and find the resources you need. In this, something that's always helped me is that somebody other has the same problem that you have probably, and they've already tried to solve it. So why don't you try searching for their answer? This has helped me a lot because you can always find an answer and it's almost always out there. And if you don't find it, you can contact me. No, try to work on it on yourself. But look for answers. They're out there and you're not alone. And also don't be lazy, do your research. Computers are really advanced machines, which we can use much better than we actually use them. So it's better to try making the PC do the things for you and not trying to organize Excel by shifting the cells, but by really knowing how to use all these tools we have online. My Mendeley story was that I am lazy. I don't like doing stuff twice. If I can really not do them twice, I'm going to really do everything I can to only do things once. And I was really, how can you say, angry? I was citing programs were really expensive, and I was not really happy with this. I come from a small university with very low budgets, back then even less than now. And I'm not going to do this by hand. I'm not putting dots and commas on bibliography. I'm going to put them in the text where they go, if someone can read my work, but not on the bibliography. So I searched and found Mendeley and fell in love with it. And now I'm an advisor, and we have this as part of our curricula. We gave it to our master and PhD students as part of their education. So, of course, there's other programs. I'm not only Mendeley, I'm just really fond of Mendeley. I use it a lot. And it's actually one of my prerequisites to get somebody into our team is you have to work with Mendeley. If you don't want to, search for another team. And I'm really happy that I was able to see this whole program develop and participate also a bit in it and help a lot of other students empower themselves through easy tools such as this one, which helps us really collaborate. Right now we're having work. We were writing a research proposal with people from 4 different countries, and we were working at the same time on the proposal and reading on Mendeley and highlighting. It was really, really fun because I'm lazy and I don't want to do work twice. So Mendeley does that part for me. And there's also a lot of free learning tools, especially for software online. Also, really short about getting cited. Some people are not aware how important it is to get your work showcased. So you should do it yourself. You have your Mendeley profile, you have your ResearchGate profile, which is also really, really good. And this has really springed our citations because we were working on a small area of research and more people got to know us. Why? Because although we have Elsevier here present, nowadays it's Google who searches for this. It's not the librarian or the papers you find here. So there's less importance for impact factors and editorial houses and more for quality research. And this is really appreciated. So put your work up there and people will find it. And also, I have a really nice story to tell you about angels. So I call them angels. It's like business angels, somebody who's like taking care of you. So my PhD thesis mentor, we've been working separately for a couple of years. And a year back, I was expecting my 3rd application to hopefully go through for a project. It was the 3rd time I tried for the same foundation. And she was at a congress and somebody asked, wait, what is Sofia doing right now? She's doing the same research as somebody at her faculty. And here my mentor acted as an angel and a business angel. And she said, no, it's a different research, completely different, same animal, but different research, and it's on resilience. And she explained it to this person who was at the board. She didn't know at the time that this person asking questions was at the board. So being at congresses and networking and explaining your research and having others back you up on this also helps a lot. Needless to say, my research went through, and I'll talk about it later. And something that has really, really changed my career experience, also in research, not only as in a personal level, on a personal level, is that I've been educated to invest in others. I'm from a bigger family, and adding value to others at all of my levels of education and of work has really, really brought a lot of richness to my life, but also to others, and a lot of good things for my work also. So I wanted to really tell everyone it's really good if you accept extra or volunteer work at your institute, at your university. Don't think doing research alone will make you the best researcher or the best person at work. Through volunteer work, through giving value to others, you acquire many soft skills, social, managing, contacts, which you do not acquire pipetting at the lab. And also it allows for great networking. It's a very fulfilling experience, and you empower other people to keep running and being better than us. And I had two big events I was volunteering at. One was the open house at the university, and the other one was career day at the university, which we called Working in Science. And it was an activity that students organized. I was just like a mentor for the activity. And so many good things came out of this. The one evident one was that even at the same career day, one person already got a job right there. So more than 40 companies came, and it was a whole event because we all learned how to work together and acquire soft skills that, in this case, it was math students, biology, geology students were not acquiring in another way. So it was really fulfilling experience. And I really encourage everyone, because this also allowed me to get to know other colleagues, and now we're able to work together much better. And it's much nicer to go to work and enjoy who you're working with, of course. And this almost always accept collaborations. Some didn't work out, some worked out excellent. Also, when you do collaborations and you see some kind of ideas you can work on, persevere in your project applications. So in 2016, one of my colleagues told me, do you want to use these brains? I need the animals, and I know you're into brains. And do you want to see the brains of these animals? And it was really interesting. These are little lizards from our coast. So I said, yes, of course, let's try. And I was using a method for measuring neurotransmitters in the brain. And I said, okay, I'm doing this on rats, just try it on lizards, see how it works. And we got some interesting results. Since then, I've been applying for a research grant on researching resilience on these animals, on the brain structures. And I finally got a project. And this all began, I would have never thought of doing work with lizards unless this colleague had called me up to, well, we like these brains. So now I got an installation grant, and we are able to employ 2 people at the faculty for doing research. So say yes to collaborations always. And another happy story is 3 years back, a colleague from an institution working on data acquisition and reports on reports on nature's state of nature for special interventions, said they wanted students they wanted to take students for internships, because before employing them, they wanted to see them work and teach them their new abilities, which they don't get at the university in the tables at the classrooms. So this colleague sent an email in 2017. Since then, we've been preparing 3 years for a project, trying to get these internships going. We've been team building 2 years. At the beginning, it was like, how am I going to work with all these people? Now it's a team of 20 people. From this, our faculty has 5,000 students, 800 employees. And now we have a really big project going on, which is the Career Center at the University of Zagreb. And This was one of our first meetings in the COVID-19 scenario, because we started with the project on the day COVID quarantine was imposed almost. So we had our quarantine meetings, and during the following 2 years, we're gonna do a lot of internships with students from all around. And this all came up because of an email that I didn't erase. So I recommend you. This for me, it's almost more important than my research right now. Don't tell this to the grant givers, but it's really, really nice to see all these students really hype about getting a career center where we have a psychologist, a psychotherapist, and a lawyer helping them around with getting the first jobs. So this is, I'm about to finish. So I wanted to encourage you to know your skills, the ones you have and the ones you need to develop, and not be afraid. We're all there. We've all been there. I had a lot of hard time. Now you see all the good results, but I've had really hard years coming before. And also know your own dreams. You have to have them and work on them. And it's okay to say no to some dreams and acquire new ones. And just as a small summary, I like both teaching and research, so I chose where to work at a university. I discovered an excellent mentor and allowed the conversation to flow, and she employed me as a PhD researcher. I'm passionate about ethics, and I did a master's degrees, and now I'm giving classes on bioethics at the university. And I gave my time for extracurricular activities, and in the meantime, I learned a lot about teamwork, about leading teams, about setting priorities, about delegating work on others, about protocols, about stuff that maybe some colleagues will learn much later because they're not involved in these kinds of activities. So to finish, I would like to encourage you to continue dreaming and growing. Your priorities and dreams will change, probably from your PhD phase to your postdoc and early career researcher, because your life will change a lot. But don't worry, it's important to develop your abilities and desires to learn always. This is really important. So nothing. I hope I inspire you to take advantage of small situations to grow. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. Now it would be nice to know if there are any questions, actually, and we can go through if any have been submitted. So we'll just wait for those to come up. Okay, so it looks like there are no questions at present. So now we will move over to Christopher to take us through his life after publication presentation, please. Over to you, Christopher.
Cool. Well, hello, good afternoon, and welcome to everybody in the audience. My name's Chris Tancock, and I'll be spending a little bit of time talking to you about the importance of how to get noticed after publication, and then looking at some of the ways in which you can really make an impact with your work. So in today's session, first of all, we're going to be looking at the ways in which you can own your research, make sure that your name is the one associated with what you've been doing. But therefore, then we're going to be looking at some options and some tips on sharing before we finally move on to looking at ways in which you can track and sort of assess the impact of the work. So before I go on, I'll just introduce myself. So my name's Chris Tancock, and I'm a publication as a communications manager even here at Elsevier. I've been with Elsevier now for around about 15 years, and most of my time here has been spent in managing academic portfolios, working with a number of editors on different journals in social science fields, and I've been working with them to sort of make sure that their journals publish and reach their audiences, grow and develop, and that kind of thing. And nowadays, I'm working directly on some of the main communication channels that we have that we use to send out information and advice to our communities of authors, editors, and reviewers. In my spare time, I tend to do a lot of first aid things. I get involved with some of the local first aid initiatives going on, and I also teach in the community myself. So before we go into the details then of thinking about how it is that you go around getting noticed after publication, let's take a step back and just consider the context in which we find ourselves. I'm not going to go in detail through all of the numbers on this screen, but suffice to say that the amount of scientific literature is increasing exponentially. So every year there's more and more PhDs awarded, more and more journals, more and more publications. I think the headline figure for me is this one of 2.5 million articles being published every year. So as an individual author, how can you possibly get noticed? How can you let your voice be heard above the hubbub, if you like? And obviously, when we're thinking about this in the context of the global pandemic of coronavirus, that job is made even harder. How is it you can do this without being able to travel, without being able to conference, without being able to access your regular networking possibilities? So hopefully some of the tips and tricks that I'm going to go through may give you some food for thought into how you can do that, and at least, as you said, make your voice be heard there. So that's all very well and good, but the first thing to think about then is making sure that it's your name that's associated with your research, and that is sometimes easier said than done. Happily, however, there are a number of useful tools you can use in order to do that. So the one I'm going to focus on briefly is this one is ORCID, which is a unique identifier that you can apply for, or you can get completely free and use to make sure that your research is undeniably linked to your name. So just to illustrate the situation, if I go into Scopus and I do a fairly simple search for J. Smith, for example, as you can see there, I get a whopping 17,000 results, 17,000 different J. Smiths. And if you are one of those J. Smith trying to make sure that your research is there and is associated with your profile, that may seem like a bit of a daunting task. But you can use ORCID to make sure that your research is linked to your and only your profile, and then you can use that on platforms like Scopus, on Mendeley and other places as well. So first of all, before anything else, I'd encourage you to check ORCID out and to make sure that anytime you publish, that you're using your ORCID ID, and any platforms which you may want to associate, be that academia.edu, ResearchGate, Mendeley, Scopus, as we've got here, you can then link your ORCID number and make sure that all your publications are therefore brought into that profile. So ORCID's a good thing to start with. When we're talking about profiles, you've got a number of different choices, of course, but I'm just going to focus on a couple of those here in my presentation. So we just saw one version of an author's profile in Scopus. This is another one. This is one of my former editors, in fact, and from a Scopus profile, which is again is entirely free. It's automatically generated, but you can search for it, you can claim it, you can then use it to network, to portray yourself, and you can also get a number of insights from what's going on with your profile there. So for example, as you can see on screen here, it will show the number of documents, the number of publications you've got, which are indexed by the platform. You can see the citations you received. You can look at your output over the years and see where you've been more or less busy. and you can see certain metrics. For example, the H index, they're 18 in the case of Jonathan. So there's a number of things you can do with that platform, and obviously these metrics can be very useful when it comes to things like tenure applications, funding, and other research-based performance valuations. And of course, it's a great way of being found, being noticed by somebody. If they come to your Scopus profile, they're going to get a very detailed, very rich interpretation of what you've been doing and how you've been doing it over the course of the lifetime there. So Scopus is one way of doing that. Another one to look out for, and this is something that Sophia's also mentioned, is Mendeley. So there are lots of things you can do with Mendeley. Most people know it because of its reference manager capabilities, which are undoubtedly very, very powerful indeed. However, there's whole other side to Mendeley through the profile system. And again, entirely free. You can go on, claim your profile. You can curate it how you like, and you can display a number of things that you can see there, from basic information about yourself. You can upload your photos. You can say where you're working. You can list your publications. Actually, that's done automatically for you. But you can also show and gain information about your co-authors, the ways in which you've been interacting with other members of the community, and you can also manage, interact, and do things with groups, whether that be collaborating or sharing research, commenting on citations, on documents, that kind of thing. So lots of things you can do with your profile on Mendeley there. So check it out. There's about 6 million researchers that are using Mendeley. So you'll be among friends there. You're sure to find several people with whom you might want to interact. And of course, it's another great way of getting noticed and helping to sort of showcase what you've been doing. So that's then owning your research and making sure that your name is familiar when it comes to a particular subject area. But in terms of really, again, getting your research noticed and pushing it out to a wider audience, then obviously sharing is going to be one of the main things you might want to consider there. So we make it easy for our authors at Elsevier, and one of the ways in which we do that is by this system called share links. And the majority of our journals offer authors share links, and what are is basically a link which is sent automatically to the authors of published papers, and then they can share those with anyone they like, with friends, family, colleagues. They can put it on social media, and what that means is that anybody clicking on that link, they will then be taken directly to the research in question without any need to sign up or register. And for 50 days, access to that material is entirely free. So that really does break down the barriers in terms of accessing research, and it's quite a powerful tool. We've been doing this for a number of years and have increased the potential, increased the way it's sent out to authors over the last couple of years. And as you can see there, even by 2018, we were looking at a very high number, 10 million article views just by means of share links alone. And no surprises that the majority of usage seems to be coming from social media. So a great way of announcing your new publication to the world. Stick it onto Facebook or Twitter. Here you go, guys. Here's our new publication, and here's the share link that you can use to read it entirely free, entirely easily. So again, check those things out if you possibly can. So sharing is a great way of getting your research out there, but another aspect I wanted to briefly mention is this issue of making sure that your research is accessible to as broad an audience as possible. So it's all very well and good sharing left, right and centre on social media and elsewhere, but another important aspect to consider is, can people really understand what it is that you're trying to do, especially if they're not an expert in whichever field you're working in. So a good way of really opening up your research and sort of underlining the impact that you're making is to write a lay summary for your research. And a number of different journals and publications are doing this now. I'm going to put a few of them up on screen just to sort of show some examples. But essentially what a lay summary is a paragraph to just explaining what it is that your research is about, what you've found, what are the major implications. The main thing to think about is that the idea is with a lay summary that anybody should be able to pick it up, read it, and without any kind of scientific background, any kind of expertise in whichever area you're working in, they should be able to understand what it is that you've done, what results you've come up with, and that kind of thing. So especially in a context where a number of you are being asked to sort of prove the societal impact of the research that you're doing, a lay summary is a great way of forcing yourself to think in layman's terms about how it is you can explain that to a non-specialist audience. So we're seeing a lot of these things happening nowadays, and I think we'll be seeing even more of them as time goes on. If this phases you, think, oh, blimey, I don't know how on earth I would approach that, I have some good news for you. There's an article I wrote a couple of years ago, which should be on the screen now, and that's a nice way of just getting you into this area of lay summaries. So I've got a further reading slide at the end of the presentation, so you can see a number of other resources. But even if you just Google how to write a lay summary and Elsevier, you'll come across that article, and it'll give you some tips and tricks on how to go around writing a lay summary there. So with the final part of my presentation is focusing on this issue of once you've published, once you've got noticed, how is it that then you can think about really making an assessment of your impact? Do you know if you've been successful in your goals? Who is reading your paper? Is that what you wanted? That kind of thing. And again, there's a number of ways you can do this. May come as no surprise, having heard a few different things about Mendeley, but there is also a way of doing this in Mendeley. So I thought I'd briefly mention the Mendeley impact feature that some of you may not have seen yet. So again, associated with your profile on Mendeley, there's an element, there's an aspect, a tool on Mendeley that you can use called Mendeley Impact, which allows you to track the impact of your research. So the profile you can see on the screen in front of you, as you can see there, it shows the number of citations that your publications have been getting. It shows how many Mendeley users have been interacting with your research, have been adding it to their library and reading it. It shows the number of times that any publications you have in Science Direct have been downloaded, and there's more detailed views than this. So you can go in, for example, see a global map and see where in the world people have been interacting with your research. It's a really nice, really powerful way of uncovering some very interesting insights. You may not know, for example, that you've got a whole card of very interested readers in South Australia or something. I haven't published much, I must admit, but whenever I look at my Mendeley impact, I'm always astounded by the fact there seem to be a number of people in Canada who seem to be interested in the things I've written. Why, I have no idea, but there you go. So there's a few things you can do with the Mendeley impact. So check it out and see if you can get some useful insights for yourself. It also, I must add, it also interfaces with another neat solution which is called Newsflow. And what Newsflow does is to make an assessment of the societal impact in terms of mentions in the media. So it scans about 55,000 different public sources of media and gives you information on how your research has been consumed by those sources. So it's very useful and very interesting insight indeed. And finally, we'll come on to PlumX metrics, which is another nice, interesting way of looking at impact. So PlumX are made up of 5 different views, 5 different ways, if you like, of looking at impact, and ranging from sort of traditional usage figures. So number of clicks, the number of views, the number of downloads that are being made to your work, through to mentions on places like Wikipedia, through to the impact you're having through social media, the number of likes, the number of +1s, of shares, and that kind of thing. So what you get from the PlumX metric, which is then kind of linked to your profile on things like Scopus, is this what's called the Plum print that you can see here next to this person's profile on Scopus for this particular article. So with that Plum X print, which is different, which changes according to which article is being looked at. You see a different array of those different nodules, if you like. So you can see here that the green element, which is the usage one from the previous slide, the green one is the most contributive to this person's plum print. So they've had more usage, more impact through the traditional usage metrics than any of the others. So check that out. It's associated with any articles you published on Scopus, so have a look at it and see if it's something that helps you to sort of work out if your aims are being fulfilled with your research there. So I'm going to whiz to the end of this presentation now, but just to say I hope this has been useful. It's been a useful insight into some of the ways in which you can continue to gain impact even after publication. I'll put up on screen now a list for the reading, and I'll try and share this. I'll make sure it gets to you. But by all means, please contact me if you haven't managed to get a copy. So all of these resources are freely available. I'll just draw your attention to the second to last one on the list, the author resources link there, and on that web page, so if you Google Elsevier author resources, you'll see a number of useful guides. In fact, one we have just re-released this very week, in fact just yesterday, on this whole topic of getting noticed. So there's a lot more tips and tricks in there. So again, please feel free to download it, share it around, and any comments, any questions, then please do get in touch. But otherwise, it only remains for me to say thank you very much for your attention. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and of course I hope that you and your family stay safe in these crazy times. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. See if we've got any questions coming through. While we're waiting for that, I do actually have a question I thought I would ask. In terms of our authors that we have at Elsevier, in terms of showcasing their research and the resources and things that we have available, what is the most popular tool? I think, is it potentially the share links tool that we've seen to get used the most, for instance?
Yes, I'd probably say so. I must admit I don't have the usage figures to hand, but certainly from some of the headline figures that I was showing earlier, the 10 million shares via share links and that kind of thing, I think that's probably had the most direct impact in the last few years. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And I think as well, in terms of your list at the end, that was very useful to see the different resources and things where people can actually go to get more information, especially in terms of kind of like the lay summaries that you mentioned as well there. We are trying to put out as many articles as we can to provide assistance.
Yeah, one thing I'd encourage though, if you do want to read any more into these kind of subjects, so one of the channels that I manage is called Authors Update, and what we aim to do there is to share tips, tricks, insights into publication and give you advice on basically how you can get the most out of your publication. So the lay summaries article that I mentioned is on there. There are articles about things like the share links. In fact, there's one which is going to come out probably tomorrow on the topic of how to get noticed, various different resources that you can use. So if you haven't already, have a look at Elsevier Authors Update. You can subscribe again, it's entirely free. And if there are any topics that we haven't covered that you think we should, then please, by all means, get in touch, and I'll do our best to make sure we get an article on that.
Great. Thank you, Chris. So if there are no questions on the chat that I can see, we will move over to Max and your presentation on open science, please.
Okay. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Max Vogler. I will also be adding an American accent to this panel this afternoon. And I'm going to talk about open science, some of the trends that we're seeing, the strategies and implications of those trends, with a focus also on early career researchers and the research system as a whole. So I thought I would start by talking a little bit about what is open science in general and what does it mean for the research community that we're all seeing at the moment, then have a specific focus on the early career researchers, and then take a brief look at Elsevier in this space. I usually say feel free to stop me at any time to ask questions, but I think in this format that's not going to work so well. So keep your questions until the end if you have some, and then feel free to ask them, engage in a discussion, whatever. So let's start with open science. And the way I thought I would do this is I'd give you 3 different ways of looking at open science. So 3 different definitions so that you can see sort of how the research ecosystem is looking at the topic as a whole. The first one is just a very basic one for Wikipedia that will give you a sense of what openness means. It doesn't just mean open science in the sense of making publications available, but it really means having an open science system so that many different things, publications, data, software, social media in general, so that all these things can begin to interact in a new way, and in some ways creating a richer science system that then will create a new sorts of value for both other scientists and for society, making both the transfer within disciplines, between disciplines, and between science and society easier. If we want to look at how that sort of definition then works in practice, I thought the second definition that I'd share with you comes from the European Union, which has identified 8 practices essential for open science and is putting these into practice, or beginning to put these into practice, in their various policy levers in Horizon Europe and now within the new framework program as well. And that has to do with, how does open science change the way that the rewards and incentive systems are placed within science, which is important for early career researchers. How do research indicators and metrics begin to shift as we think beyond just pure impact based on scientific citations? How does that change the future of scholarly communication? How can we create an open science cloud that really places all these resources together? How can we make sure that data is shared in what's called a fair way? I'll talk a little bit about that later. To enhance research integrity for the system as a whole, improve skills and education for the European population, and of course also help bring the broader public, i.e. citizen science, also farther into the scientific practice. And this is how the EU sees open science. The third view I thought I'd give you is our view from Elsevier. And we also see open science, I think, in the spirit the same way, a way of making science more inclusive, collaborative, and transparent. And then we see this coming together in terms of these 6 pillars here on the right, 5 pillars and 1 sort of base layer. And I'll take you through them one to one so that you see how the research ecosystem is really changing in practice of open science. So let's start with the first one, and let's start with open access. And for open access, this really means 3 different things. It's not just about publications, but it's about open access to publications. And we can see here that every year we see a larger and larger percentage of publications from all large publishers, including Elsevier, going toward open access, but shifting a whole system from one that's used to working with a subscription pay to read mode to a model where institutions, countries, or scientists then pay to have their articles made publicly accessible in open access takes time. So this is a global transformation. What we've also seen in terms of open access is the really important role that preprints have started to play in the scientific process. And this is something that I think has been accelerated in the COVID-19 crisis, and not just because of the speed of information, but also because I think over the past 3 months, none of us have been going to conferences. I mean, what Sophia said at the beginning, this is where you network. So where do you actually have conversations about your work? And I think preprints are a really interesting place, or preprint servers, where people are commenting on each other's works at the moment. And we're seeing a shift in what is conversation and where does scientific conversation take place in the system. And finally, open access also means bringing other types of publications and content into the science system. And here I especially think of my own discipline of history and a lot of the local and regional and linguistically different journals. So that it's not always English language, it's not always bioinformatics or something like that. And being able to also bring all of that knowledge into the science system. So open access really means taking all those different types of publications and bringing them into this larger conglomerate. The second thing, of course, is open data. And here I did want to talk about what I mentioned before, these FAIR principles. So the way that open science looks at data is that data should be findable, that's the F, accessible, that's the A, interoperable, that's the I, and reusable, that's the R. So that means open research data should be shared in a way from the paper, from your own work, in a way so that other scholars can both use it to verify your work, use it to build on your work, or use it to do comparative analysis for their own work or for any other ways. The third pillar then has to do with open metrics, of using the different types of data that links different elements. So if you see open science as being this large data lake of data, of publications, of different types of micro blog posts or anything else, and those things are all linked, you can begin to create interesting ways of measuring what seems to be valuable, what seems to be resonating in the scientific community when we talk about open science. And this is where open metrics then begins to change the discourse from just purely looking at scientific impact and going beyond that to look at larger societal or other types of impact. So that's the third pillar. The fourth thing has to do with research integrity and reproducibility. And here I really wanted to say this becomes more and more important, as we've seen again in the COVID-19 crisis, when the system begins to be strained. So when there begin to be questions asked about how good is the science, how much integrity does science, and how integer is the process in the well, open science can of course provide a new way to create data that's trusted because it's accessible, because it's verifiable by other actors within the science system. And this finally brings us to the fifth pillar, which is then connects the science to the society. And here it's important to mention that integrity, of course, builds trust. And only through trust can you have a society, government, media, and politics really coming and being able to build their own policies, their own opinions, their own ways of life, their own school district guidelines and everything else on top of the scientific data that you all produce every day to then bring into the larger community. So open science, by making everything accessible, also creates a different way of mixing science and society. And finally, all of those 5 pillars, of course, rest on a large layer of tools and software. And here, this is beyond just the Mendeley software to try to give you access to how to work with publications or data, but also thinking about how software can bring together different pieces of this to create a greater whole. And I think also what's important at the moment with tools and software is that there's an increasing focus in many disciplines on the computational sciences. So whether you're a biologist working in computational biology and so on, using tools and building your own tools to then play with data from other people, from your own data, is really something that we see as a large trend in almost all disciplines, I would say. Even within the humanities, we see digital humanities as one of the strongest emerging disciplines globally at the moment. So what does this mean for you, for early career researchers, as you're thinking about how open science affects your own life? And here there's really 3 things that I wanted to emphasize. First of all, we really see open science as creating many more options that researchers have to share the outputs of their research. So beyond the article, the traditional PDF article, we're seeing more and more data sharing. We're seeing trends in some disciplines going to micro articles, to blog posts, to greater use of social media, video, especially for methodology and for tracking methodology, or even ways of sharing and archiving software to be used, in 5 or 10 years later if you're trying to work with the same data set. So research, open science really will make research more inclusive in terms of the types of outputs you will have at your disposal as you're working as a scientist. Secondly, we think that research will continue to become more collaborative. That means there will be more and more platforms in which scientists come together to form partnerships and build and work together to collaborate. But this will also help bring other actors into the larger scientific conversation. So this is policymakers, the broader public, industry, other people who might use the world of research for their own ends and for their own questions and for the own things that they want to do. And I think in that sense, collaborative is not just working with other scientists in your discipline, but it's also interacting as a scientist with a broad world of all sorts of stuff out there. And the third thing really is that it begins to make science more transparent. And this is where we hope that open science will also increase the trust between the public and scientists. And I think as reproducibility becomes more and more important, we'll see methods and data become standards. And then we will find new ways of trying to also understand and measure the impact of what scientists do and how they work. And I think this will be especially important over the next decade. So this will be as you start your careers, because as we see shifts in transparency and shifts in what scientists value when looking at this transparent science system, I think we'll see a large shift in the type of metrics we use to evaluate individual scientists, and that will have a large effect on the reward systems that will be used to do things like hiring, tenure, and other things. So we think the transparency will also be a big trend. So what does this mean for Elsevier and for other information analytics providers in general? And here I didn't want to talk about individual products, but rather just talk about a couple of very general trends that I think will be important. One is that as we also get open science, we're going to get more of the more of the more. So we already have an information overload of publications and everything else that we produce every day as human beings on the earth. At the moment, we are at about 3 million publications a year, just traditional publications, with social media, news, data, and everything else coming on top of that. So that means one of the big roles for publishers and for analytics companies that think beyond publishing is to try to think, how can we help individual scientists better get at the information they need to do their work? So thinking beyond the publication also as ways, and this is, Mendeley is a wonderful example of this, of trying to transform information to be useful to you wherever you need it, whenever you need it, as you're doing your work. And so this means it becomes increasingly important that information is presented in its context so that it remains and has a certain amount of authority and credentials, so that scientists are also seen and respected within their fields and within their disciplines, and that we try to counter the challenges that we see in sort of fake news, fake science. Too much of everything means at some point that there's nothing of anything anymore. And so how can we create authoritative data that really helps people build on it? And this really, for me, is where we need to be moving as Elsevier in the next 5 to 10 years. And right now we're working very hard at making discovering knowledge easier. And we think that will lead to scientists in general and the broader community also being able to trust that knowledge better. And I think this is something that we've seen in the COVID-19 crisis quite a bit. So as a quick summary, open science is changing the ecosystem. Managing information, i.e. making it available to those people who need it, wherever they need it, however they need it, is really the key that we see for how open science will affect the lives of scientists over the next decade or so. And many of these things are already here. If we look at the massive increase, not just in the amount of articles and information that the COVID-19 pandemic has created, but also the ways that Many European institutions and global institutions have put together data repository, have put together tools repositories, have figured out new ways to try to link scientists with each other, disciplines with each other, media and science journalists with scientists, and the broader public with the science community. It's really a way to say the future seems to be here. It's not evenly distributed over all crises, over all disciplines, over all parts of the world, but it's there, and we're seeing glimpses of it, of what we've seen now with COVID over the past couple of months, and it's really exciting. So with that, I think I will end and pass back to Lindsay, and I want to thank you for your time and for coming and joining this panel.
Thank you, Max. That was really insightful. Lots of exciting opportunities there, I think, in terms of open science and the transparency as well that it will bring as well. I think we're really kind of entering into a new phase here. Yeah, really good. Thank you. We'll just wait to see if there are any questions from the floor. We'll take it from there. I don't know as well as if any of the speakers have any sort of discussion points that they wanted to raise. Now we've sort of been through all of our presentations. If there's anything that kind of set out in your minds that you think, yeah, this is really kind of a key trend here, is something really key for the researchers to take away. Put you on the spot. I think we've had a lot of good kind of discussions going on, really. I think, Sophia, your topic there in terms of you're taking us through your early career research experiences are really insightful there, and how it was quite a sort of a solitude journey perhaps to start with, but to keep going, keep persisting through there, and sort of really encouraging any form of collaboration that comes your way. Just take it, because you know you don't know where it will go to and what it might lead to. So really just move forward with it, encouraging network, and obviously remembering not to be lazy as well, and to to take it all on. So yeah, saying yes to everything is key. I think that's sort of come out really quite clear from your presentation. And also the importance of having a good mentor as well can really do wonders at kickstarting your career there. The fact that it's always a learning career, it's a journey, as they say.
One thing I think I'd sort of say is that, you know, we've heard a lot about the difficulties that have been imposed by the coronavirus pandemic and how much harder it is to network and to get yourself heard. But I'd say that on the plus side, on the positive side, there are still ways of doing this. So hopefully we've been able to lift the lid a little bit on some of the ways in which you can still make sure you network and find and are found by other people out there. So don't despair, nil desperandum. I think it'll be one message I would send back to the audience.
Definitely, yeah. Okay. And I think, Chris, you were saying as well, the importance of owning your research is quite key there as well. You know, you've done it, so it's really up to you to really push this forward now to the next stage and really make sure it gets noticed using all the tools and resources that are available to you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, nobody else, unfortunately, is going to do this for you. But again, on the plus side, there are a number of ways in which you can do this. And I've just shown a few of them, right? And it's up to you to make sense of what works best for you, and to be clear on the aims you have for your research. What do you want to get out of this? Where do you want your voice to be heard, etc.? And then define whichever tool or set of tools works best for getting those aims.
Yeah. We've had a question here come through actually on the chat that says, is there a risk in increasing the use of preprint servers as they share research that has not yet been peer reviewed?
So I think that's one of the most exciting questions in science policy at the moment. It's one that I spend a lot of my time at the moment discussing with people at universities, with researchers, with politicians, and with decision makers in other contexts as well. And I think the thing is, there's no way to close Pandora's box. Preprint servers are there, and they have a very useful function within the science community, and you can't restrict them to say only people with a PhD are allowed to have access to a preprint server. You can't do it. And what we've seen, or what I've seen at least in my conversations, is that there is a trend among people who run the servers and also among established journals that have preprint servers such as The Lancet, to try to figure out ways to better inform users of the information about what a preprint is, the fact that it's not verified, the fact that it hasn't been through preprint, to say, this is work in progress, this is a conversation, this isn't a finished piece of scientific work that has, a verified attempt at an answer. I mean, as scientists, we know that the answer is always tomorrow sometime. I mean, you put something out there and then a couple of months later, somebody comes and says, yes, but, and then the answer continues to evolve. But I think we do need to figure out good ways. And again, the community is working on this in the preprint server space to try to make known what preprints are and what they're not. And that there is still a value in saying that there is a version of record that has been through rigorous peer review, that is something that policymakers and other scientists can build on in a different way than just saying, hey, here's something, I'm going to throw it out there on a preprint server. Tell me, community, what you think. And that's very rough still. Yeah. But yeah, it's a great question. I think it's one of the most important questions of 2020.
We've also had another question here from a student asking that they were once discouraged from their professor at university to cite their open access papers in one of their assignments. So the question is whether or not, is there also a negative connotation when it comes to open access publications? Whether or not this is perhaps an isolated case, or is it a challenge that we need to overcome within open science?
I would say it's the mark of maybe a generational shift that's still happening. I think open access still has a ways to go if you compare all publications in open access versus all publications that aren't still open access, in terms of their renommee, in terms of where they are being printed, in terms of the journals where they are. Open access still has a little bit of catching up to do, but that's on aggregate. Individual papers, if they're useful and if they're important to you, I don't see any reason why anybody should not cite them. I mean, they're what you're reading to build your work off of, and it shouldn't really matter what your professor thinks. At least that's what I think.
Good advice.
Yeah. At worst, it'll lead to a nice discussion in class.
Good. I hope that answers your question. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's also related to critical thinking and how we've sometimes at the universities teach students to be really good technical technicians, really good with technical abilities, and sometimes they miss the critical thinking. So actually it's quite good to see a good paper and a bad paper, and whether open access or not, to actually learn to use them, because more and more everything is more open access, either if we want it or not. So it's really important to have access to all the information. Also, when I was working with autism, the parents associations and their ability to have access to data was also really important for the ones, of course, not on the extremes. So taxpayers are paying our research, and I tell this a lot to my students on not only bioethics, but we have a responsibility to communicate, to make research open, to have these lay summaries and express what we're doing, because we're mostly being funded through taxpayers' money. So they have a right to know also. So it's kind of like this whole new era where information has to be available.
On that point, I know there's occasionally a bit of a mistrust out there in the public about the research that is being generated, and one of the things I draw attention to is that there's a wonderful group in the UK called Sense About Science, and they have a very, very useful engagement guide, public engagement guide. I can see Sophia nodding along there, which is good. So that was actually linked to in my further reading stuff. So again, I would very much encourage you, go and check that out. It's really great. Got lots of tips and tricks on how to get the best engagement from your work, how to respond to people who may have questions, may have doubts about the research that you're doing. And when you combine that with things like lay summaries and with sharing and all these other things we've been discussing, you can really get a wonderful but also very positive impact for your work, not only with your peers, but also with the wider public. And I guess, you know, if we can do that, any of us can go home and feel like we've really achieved something, right?
Yeah. I ask my students when I'm in the master's thesis defense, I usually have one of my questions is, how would you explain your research to your grandmother or to your colleague, which you found on the tram going back home, and like, oh, I just graduated, so what did you do your thesis on? I was like, whoa, he's studying economics, how do you explain it? It's really, really important. So they're working on this.
Yeah. There I can say, I think distance happens. I can explain my dissertation much better now than I could 20 years ago, because now I tend to blend out all the unimportant stuff and just focus on what was actually interesting.
Yeah.
One nice technique that I teach to colleagues is to start with the press release. So when you're at the beginning of a project, then think, you know, to the very end, think like, if you were now writing up the press release, what would you want to be saying in this press release? What would success look like? And importantly, how would you describe that success to a non-specialist audience? So if you can do that, and if you can be clear about your aims and the way in which you describe your research, then again, you're off with a winning streak there.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's everything that's come through on the chat. So if there are no further questions, I think I will move to close the session. I'd like obviously to extend a huge thank you to all of the speakers this afternoon for taking the time to share their expertise with us. And I hope you all who have attended this session, sorry we can't see you unfortunately, but we know you're there. So I hope you've all found it useful. I'd like to thank you for all taking the time to come along and listen. So enjoy the rest of your conference. I hope there's many more sessions and things you've signed up to go along to. And yeah, we'll hopefully see you next time, see you next year. So, thank you everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Goodbye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ciao.